this youth, and oh my gosh, 14. Think about when you were 14, and you probably didn't have all of this history. 14 is overwhelming. I mean, hormones, growth changes, school, being in foster care. He was probably, going to different schools and moving around, so he has a lot of loss issues, and a bunch of attachment stuff since mom probably was not able to form that secure attachment with him when he was a child. So lots of stuff going on with this poor young man. So yeah, I can see how his behavior makes sense. Do I like it? No. But that gives me an idea about where to intervene. It also gives me an idea knowing that his primary caregiver was exposing him to violence and not taking care of him. And I may be jumping that down to that attachment issues interfering with recovery. Why should he trust us? The person who gave birth to him didn't protect him. And he probably experienced other difficulty with that sort of thing. Defensiveness impacts his ability to recover. I'd be defensive too. When you're going through those sorts of situations, don't tell me what to do, or feeling like every time you give any sort of constructive feedback, it's a personal attack. Well, his ego strength is about speaking. He has very low self-esteem probably from the poor attachment issues and everything, and just by virtue of being 14 years old, bless their hearts. Teenage years are so hard. But he's going through some, think about Erickson's stages of development at this point. He's trying to figure out who he is and what he's good at. And if we come at him in a way that causes him to experience transference, let's just go there. I can see why he would get defensive. He probably relies a lot. Again, mom rejected me, maybe subconsciously, but feels that's what it may feel like to him. Now, why am I lovable? Who's going to love me? So it's terrifying to me if you don't approve of me and think of me as great and wonderful all the time, because I'm afraid you're going to abandon me too. So yeah, I can see getting defensive, because that's terrifying if you start feeling like somebody's getting ready to walk out on you again. Learn that violence is an effective method for getting his way, and recognize that he's only being seen for his challenges. Oh, and that's one thing what we can do, and we can encourage foster parents to do, and primary caregivers and teachers. And as a parent, I can tell you, I don't do as good of a job as I wish I did. I really try to do better. I really try to focus on it. But I don't do as much positive praise. Noticing the things that you did well and saying, wow, you made your bed today. That is really awesome. Thank you. Or you did a great job doing your chores, or congratulations on the A, or whatever it is. I take those things for granted sometimes, and I got to remind myself to reinforce the positive and not only speak up when there's the trash didn't get taken out, or dog peed on the floor or something. And it's important for us as clinicians to also do the same thing. Reward them just for showing up. Thank you for coming to your appointment today. Even when I worked in the schools, sometimes the kids would not want to leave class. Or if a lot of times they didn't want to leave class because they just wanted to get out of class. But they wouldn't want to focus. They're like, I want to draw, or I want to do this or that. And they didn't want to focus on anything. They just saw it as extra recess. So when they did show up, we would thank them for coming, and then we would talk about the purpose of why I was there and things, and we would talk about what would you like to do today while we talk, or what activity, and I would give them 2 or 3 different things, knowing that they needed a menu of options to feel empowered. also overwhelming and a little bit, I would feel kind of vulnerable if I was a kid and somebody was coming to my school and plucking me out of class to talk to me once a week or something. So those are things we want to think about, but making sure that we remember to recognize them for their strengths, not just their challenges, but also recognize them for who they are. Not what they do or do, but the fact that they're awesome human beings, whether you're dealing with adults or young people. That's my Rogerian side coming out. I really believe that everybody has good in them and is forward moving for some reason. Organizational triggers. Organization represents not being with his mother and other therapies and further separation from his grandmother. If he's been hospitalized, you know, he may have suicidal ideation here and there, but he may not want to say it because he doesn't want to go back to a locked unit. If he is, the other thing, being in the system, being in care for a lot of his life, he's probably learned the right things to say. You know, they could look at you with a straight face and go, I'm feeling fine, I'm feeling great. You know, my appetite's good, I'm sleeping fine, and no problems whatsoever. So we do want to recognize that a lot of times our clients, adults and younger clients, learn how to talk the talk to get out of treatment, to get discharged, appropriately discharged, not to drop out. And even at 14, I think he's aware of guilt and what a powerful little tool that is to motivate and manipulate. Now that's seeing the negative side. A couple of things I got out of that is sometimes we do see two faces. We see the in session where everybody's trying to say what we're supposed to say and, oh yes, I understand, and then it all lets loose behind closed doors. We do need to be aware of that and with, you know, adult couples and a poorly informed support system. I think it's really important that we educate our caregivers and our supporters. You know, even if you've got an adult client, whoever lives with them, whoever they consider their social support system, their family, that they're willing to get involved, educate them about the HPA axis and HPA axis dysregulation. I read a really awesome explanation of HPA axis dysregulation this week when I was preparing a class. Our body, think of our body and our HPA axis kind of like insulin. And when we eat sugar, our body dumps a bunch of insulin to try to balance things out. But when that sugar goes away, we end up with way too much insulin and we crash, right? Okay, the HPA axis is similar. The sugar is the stress, and the insulin is the cortisol. And our body dumps cortisol and norepinephrine and glutamate and all those fight or flight chemicals to help us deal with the stress. But then after a while, hopefully the stress leaves, or the acute, really threatening stress leaves, and the body wants to rebalance. It says, I can't run that hot that long. I can't keep, so that's gone, but the cortisol levels are still high. Then the body says, oh, we can't keep this, so we've got to rebalance ourselves. So it starts sending out hormones and chemicals to balance it out. So then the person's not feeling stressed anymore, but they're going to the point of feeling depressed. Just like when we crash after sugar, people's moods can crash after stress. And the more that happens with trauma, the more pronounced that crash is. When that stressor is gone, we're home. But then when that stressor's there, it's kind of like you just took a great big spoonful of white sugar and you know your insulin goes like this. Well, people's cortisol levels go like that. It's like, okay, there is actually a threat. Crap, I've got to respond now. And it's important for, even if you don't want to get into analogies and things like that, it's important for loved ones to understand emotional dysregulation. When people have gone through trauma, whether it's big T trauma, an acute trauma, or little t trauma, that chronic trauma or complex trauma or any kind of trauma. When we are in situations like that where we experience danger, we can go through periods where we get exhausted. And then when something happens, we are 200 miles an hour again. We are in that fight or flight. It's like, okay, I'm going to get it. Because when we were down, when we were in that lull, we weren't relaxed. We were lulled. We were just like kind of shell-shocked, kind of sitting there. And this is how life goes. And then a stressor comes along, and it's back to fight or flight again. You're not going from sleep and rest and calm to, okay, there's no rest. I like the term dysregulation because when we say overreact, that to me has a negative connotation. You overreacted to that situation. Excuse me? You dysregulated. Okay. That doesn't sound quite as pejorative or whatever word you want to use. Because people aren't intentionally reacting like the sky is falling when you leave the cap off the toothpaste. They were already at the top of that cliff, and that cap being off the toothpaste tube was just enough to push them over the edge, and they're in free fall now. If they had the ability to regulate those emotions in that moment, would they? None of us wants to freak out, unless that's been reported over and over again, but that's not a healthy situation. If something happens and you get angry and you react the way you used to react, okay. After you've calmed down, think about how it might have gone differently had you used this other skill. Let's just start trying to practice this a little bit. Encourage him to practice the new skill, the 4 belly breaths, we'll say. Let's just start simple. Encourage him to practice this on little things, like when he's in traffic, and heavy traffic, and traffic tends to stress people out. Encourage him when he starts feeling distressed to start using those belly breaths. When we're just a little bit irritated, we don't have so much adrenaline going through our brain that we can't think straight. So it's easier to start integrating new techniques. Just like it's easier to role play when you're learning a new counseling technique than it is to read about this technique and go and sit down with a client and go, all right, let's try this now. The heat's on. You've got some adrenaline going. Think about the first couple of times you sat in front of a client, regardless of what your position is, you work with people. It can be kind of overwhelming at first. When you're like, I know my first thought was, hope I don't break them. And then thankfully my supervisor at that point said, you ain't gonna break them. You may not do anything to help them, but you ain't gonna break them. I'm like, okay. He's like, that's pretty much the worst case scenario, is they're gonna sit through an hour session with you and they're gonna get nothing out of it. Okay. But that gave me some parameters, so I was a little bit less nervous. We've all been taught with suicide assessment. Using the word suicide is not going to make them suddenly think, oh, hey, maybe I'll kill myself. If you ask them, have you thought about committing suicide, you're not planting that idea in their head. They have likely already thought about it, but if they haven't, they'll say no. That's not one of those things that's, out here in some mystery land that nobody knows about. That's something that people talk about. So we do want to look at maintaining power and sense of safety. And we're going to think about, and we've talked about, when clients' trauma histories have triggered the use of avoidance, aggression, and passivity. And one of the things that didn't come up in any of these overtly, I may not have brought it up and it may have been there, is passivity. The client that just says, yes ma'am, yes sir, whatever you say. That client has reached that point of learned helplessness. And if we're telling them what to do, and we're making them do what we want them to do, well, it makes us feel good. But it may not make them feel good. We don't know what they need, which comes back to something Leslie brought up last time. We need to ask them what they need and bring them out of their shell. Get them to talk or write things down. Some people, my grandmother, bless her heart, would never speak up to her doctor. She had this white coat syndrome par excellence. And as soon as he'd walk in, everything was fine. And whatever he told her to do, she would do. Or maybe she wouldn't do. That was the big thing with her. That's the other thing we need to try to do, and that kind of goes back to that two faces thing. We see they tell us one thing in the office, and they do something else when they're at home. And we want to make sure that they feel comfortable advocating for themselves and saying, no, I'm not going to do that. Or that's not comfortable for me.
So what would be a technique that will encourage or motivate them to speak up? Because that is something that I'm oftentimes faced with my clients.
What kind of clients do you have?
Domestic violence.
Okay. Well, I can definitely see why they don't want to speak up. They've been punished for speaking up. So one of the first things is, and we're going to get to creating safety in a minute, and I would really, how many of you have gone through the Seeking Safety curriculum? Oh my gosh, it is a wonderful curriculum. It's one of the few best practices that you don't have to go to like a $5,000 training for. You can buy the book on Amazon. It's designed for people who are in recovery from addictions and co-occurring issues, but there's tons of activities. It's almost all a workbook. There are a lot of activities to help people start feeling safe. To get them to speak up, have them start speaking up about benign things that aren't threatening to them in any way. How did your day go? What is the best thing that happened to you today? Instead of asking, what were your problems over the week? That's vulnerable. What's the best thing that happened to you this week? Oh, I'll tell you that. Well, once they get used to talking, we see this in groups too. People start out a group and they're like, I don't want to talk. But once they start getting through, if you've been through group training, the forming, norming, storming, forming, storming, norming, and whatever the other one is. When a relationship forms, people who haven't experienced trauma have no reason to trust each other. People who have experienced trauma are going to be even more guarded and defensive. And cool. That's, in my mind, that's awesome because they're protecting themselves. And I don't want to rip that cocoon off of them and expose them. So giving them a chance to start forming relationships with one another. If you're an individual, talking about things, not delving into that trauma or delving into anything super deep right away. Make some small talk. Now, sometimes it's frustrating because you just want to get in there and help them start feeling better. Sometimes, and depending on the person's trauma history and their culture, sometimes you need to make some small talk first and establish that rapport before really delving into things. That would be the first thing. The second thing I would do is start out by having them identify their strengths and resources. What kind of recovery capital do you have right now? that we can use to help you in your process. I'm still not asking about your problems and your weaknesses and your this and that. What recovery capital do you have? That's your partly finances. You know, can you afford to go to a psychiatrist? Can you afford your medication? Can you afford, you know, what can you afford? What might we be able to hook you up with programs for? But what is your recovery capital? Can you afford to take 2 weeks off from work so you can recuperate? Not everybody can do that. Can you afford to take time off from work to come here once a week? For a lot of people, I don't know about in Chicago, in even a little podunk place like Gainesville, that's 2 hours. Half an hour leaving work to get there, an hour in session, and a half an hour to get back. If you're getting paid hourly and you don't have leave time, that can add up real quick. And if you've got children, you're trying to do it after work or something, and you've got children that you've got to get childcare for, that adds up too. And that's another reason for a lot of people drop out. If they've got children at home because they don't have, oh, I don't have anything to do with my kids. And I can't afford to get a sitter for my children for 2 or 3 hours every single week. Sitters are expensive too. E-therapy, really helpful here if they've got internet access. Most everybody at least has FaceTime on their phone. That's not HIPAA compliant, but there are HIPAA compliant apps like Zoom or VC, or I know there are others out there that they may be able to download for free. So, you know, again, getting outside the box, asking them what their recovery capital is, asking them what they want to work on. And sometimes they'll look at you, most of the time actually, they'll probably look at you in session and I don't know, I just want to feel better. I've had clients who have been in what we call dependency drug court. And if they did not follow their treatment plan, they were going to lose custody of their children. You know, this was the last straw. They'd already been involved with the department for a while, yada yada. And some of them still didn't follow that plan and got TPR, termination of parental rights. Why was losing their kids not distressing enough? Why did that not motivate them? Oh my gosh, I'm going to lose custody of my children.
Maybe they've already been on for some time, like they've been a relative caregiver or in foster care. Maybe for them the loss already happened.
Okay.
This is just a matter of legal putting them.
The loss already happened. They're already happy staying with my mom. Or they're staying with my mom. I get to see them all the time. So,
Or if they know the likelihood of them being returned isn't going to be too strenuous. So if I just, do what I have to do for X period of time, they'll come back.
okay. But even with a permanent termination of rights, they expect the children will come back when they're older. You know, as soon as they can come see me, they will. So that could be there. But there's also elements of feeling inadequate as the parent. I don't know how, I can't give this child a better life. You know, I'm a drug addict, I am a this, I'm a that, I'm the other thing. And low self-esteem, no confidence in their parenting abilities. Sometimes they feel the child would be better off somewhere else. So keeping the children and having to try to be a good parent when they don't feel like they know what they're doing, they don't feel like they have the energy, can be overwhelming. So we do want to look at behaviors. You know, I hear a lot of stigma and unfortunate things said, or I did, when these parents would permanently lose their parental rights. People would be like, how how could they choose this over that? And I'm like, well, let's look at why and understand why. Jail.
I'm thinking the same things, like, I can't be out here anyway. I can't make it on my own, or I don't have the energy or the value or whatever.
That's true. For a lot of people, they may be institutionalized because they've been in jail a lot of their life. They may not feel like they have what it takes to stay out of jail. Where I came from, I don't know how it is here, we're in more of a metro area, but I had clients who would look me in the face and tell me that half of their family and their friends were already there. So it's not a scary place to be. I'm just going to go hang with my people. Okay. That's what they knew. And, our jail was kind of well, the sheriff would go down there and do spot checks once a month and eat with them to make sure that the food was satisfactory. So, yeah, yeah, it was kind of a resort as jails go. But jail is also 3 hots and a cot. And for some people, that's better than the alternative. Emotional violence, staying in an adult relationship where there's emotional violence. Why might people stay in one of these relationships?
I mean, there's still security and chaos, even though it's not an ideal situation, it's still what you're conscious of, there's still some security there.
And a lot of times they've been told repeatedly by their abuser that they're worthless and they're nothing and nobody else is going to want them. Between an elder and a caregiver, a lot of times elders in these situations, there's a dependency issue. And they feel trapped, and they feel like a burden, and they feel guilty, and they feel like they brought it on themselves. If I wasn't such a burden to my son, he wouldn't XYZ. Interpersonal violence, a team relationship with a quarterback. I mean, yes, this is a stereotypical thing. Why might this person stay in a relationship with somebody who is uber popular at school? It's a status thing. And for teenagers, status can mean a lot. And social circle. If I speak up and get out of this relationship, then I may be ostracized not only from that person, but from our whole clique. In a relationship, when the female is pregnant, some people may stay because they want the other person to be able to be a father to the child. They may stay because they're afraid they can't raise the child on their own. They may stay because they're pregnant and they can't work right now because they're on bed rest, and that person is keeping a roof over their head. They may stay because they have nowhere else to go, and they don't want their child to be born into a situation of homelessness. Understanding why they're staying, what's the benefit to them, and how does it make sense from a survival perspective. With children or with pets, we'll just put both of those together real quick. The abuser can threaten to take, harm, kill. Either one of these. But central ideas of seeking safety. Remember, seeking safety is one of those best practices that you can actually order off Amazon. It's a little pricey. Try to get your organization to do it. It's a great curriculum. People who've experienced traumatic injury often have a pervasive sense of unsafeness, hence the title of the book. Presenting symptoms often reflect a survival or protective reaction. Developing a sense of safety is the priority of the first stage of treatment. In order to get them engaged and get them to the point where they're willing to become vulnerable, they have to feel safe. They have to know that to some extent we have their backs. Integrated treatment of biopsychosocial issues using counseling, case management, community resources, and natural supports is going to be really important. Safety isn't necessarily just about safety in your office or safety in your building. It's about helping them establish a sense of safety in the world. So safety at home, safety in their car, safety, thinking about those things. And we're getting ready to do an activity, and I'm going to have you spend 5 minutes at each station. So this one you're going to get to physical. When we look at causes of distress, interventions for distress, triggers, we want to always consider PACER. Physical causes, and that can include neurochemical. Affective causes, depression, guilt, whatever. Cognitive, environmental, and relational or interpersonal, but I needed the R to complete the acronym, so it's going to be relational. So a lot of times I'll just shorten it when I talk or when I'm trying to think, when I'm thinking about PACER triggers, and when I do my notes, I think about physically, affectively, cognitively, environmentally, and relationally, how are people doing? That aside, we're going to start with relationally. Triggers, change or unpredictability in relationships can be triggering for people. That is, let's think about it, your agency. If a therapist leaves, if they're transferred to a different department, if they go, and it's really not unexpected if they go on maternity leave, but a lot of clients, it's like they don't even register that, eventually you're gonna pop. If they get fired, heaven forbid. Any of those things can happen, and that can be really, really stressful for clients because, or even if they go through your program, and I was in residential for a long time, we'd have clients that would go through the program and they'd be out for a few months or longer, and then they'd come back and their therapist was gone. And that was devastating to them because it's like, oh, I've got to start over with somebody new. So even if they go away and they come back, they want everybody and everything to be the same. And when it's not, it is very stressful for them. If there's change in caregivers, that can be stressful for a lot of people. For children especially, if they're going to a different foster home, if they are taken from their primary home and maybe put with grandparents or aunts or uncles or whatever, they may know the people, but it's still a change. And it's still a change in their routine. It's not going to be the exact same. There's a lot of stuff that we don't think about when it comes to change, unless, these new caregivers live like right next door and have the same exact schedule. Even things like you cook scrambled eggs differently, or you don't cut the crust off my sandwich, or whatever it is. Little things that make it home are lost. Or even interpersonally in our organizations, if somebody cuts them off, abruptly ends a conversation, well, that's fine, we're done. Wrapping up a therapy session, especially for new therapists, there's an art to it. So you're not just saying, all right, time's up, get out. That doesn't work. So we need to make sure that we've got a process for de-escalating people, getting them regrounded before they go back out, so they don't feel like you were only listening to them because you had to, and then boom, out. We want to make sure people have the opportunity to talk about what it feels like when they lose someone. And this can include a therapist or a peer. I didn't talk about the peers. If people are in group counseling, for example, or in a residential group treatment, and one of their peers leaves against medical advice, graduates, something happens, we don't want to go too far down that rabbit hole, but they are no longer there for some reason. That's a loss. that person is not showing up to group every day. So they need a chance to be able to process that. In substance abuse, more often than not, well, I shouldn't say that. We do have a lot of graduations, but we plan for those, and we have a big celebration, and generally the person comes back for aftercare. But when we do group therapy and we have somebody that relapses, the group has to have a chance to process that because they feel that loss. Even if the person comes right back through detox again, they feel that loss. So we want to make sure people have a chance to grieve and get through that whole process. Denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. In substance abuse, there's a lot of anger. That, why did you go back out there again? In domestic violence, there is often anger. Why did you go put back into that situation again? You were here, you were making a lot of progress, why did you return? There are a lot of times when anger can erupt. Why did this person leave? They may just be angry because their therapist left and they've got to start all over again. Why is it every time I come back here, there's a different therapist I've got to see? I think we've all heard that if you work in an agency. And we want to validate their feelings that, it's exhausting to feel like you've got to start out with somebody new. Or it's terrifying to see someone who you related to, who you were close to, make that choice that could potentially harm them again, because it makes you realize how vulnerable you might still be. Allowing them to process it as a group. Identifying cognitive distortions around it. If somebody leaves, are they using cognitive distortions of everybody leaves? Are they personalizing it? They just don't want to see me. Or they left because of me. Or, I'm being put somewhere else because they don't love me. There are a lot of things, and especially with kids personalize. They think that everything that happens is because of something they did. I wasn't supportive enough, or I was a bad child, or I made her mad, or I did this, or I did that. And it can be things like if they have a parent die, they may feel guilty for it. If I would have been better, she wouldn't have gotten sick. So we need to remember that children have a lot of magical thinking. Developmentally, that's normal. A child isn't supposed to understand death. So we need to be aware of what their thought processes are, encourage them to talk about it so we can educate, validate, empathize, all that stuff. Something about the therapist's identity or somebody else's identity reminds them of their abuser, or reminds them of somebody they lost. If they were in a car accident and somebody died, or they were in a tragic situation when somebody was murdered, and then they see someone that reminds them either of the person that passed or the offender, abuser, whatever label we're going to put on the person. It can trigger all those feelings again. So we do want to recognize that. If the therapist reminds them of someone, to use a very Freudian analogy, if they are in an abusive home, and mom is abusive growing up, and they come to see one of us, and by virtue of the fact that we are female with brown hair about the same age, we remind them and we trigger that transference reaction. Not saying that that's necessarily a bad thing. When people are triggered, it gives them insight into some of the things that may upset them. So we can work with it, but we need to understand. We also need to understand that sometimes we may trigger them too much. And I have all of my clients create a safe space, and they use their senses. And I have them tell me about it. You know, we sit in the office and I say, okay, tell me about your safe space. Tell me 5 things that you see. If you're sitting down, tell me at least 5 things that you see. And, you know, they paint that picture and I say, okay, now what are you hearing? Tell me 3 things that you hear. And so mine is a cabin in the woods. So I hear birds, I hear the babbling brook, I hear the wind through the trees. I want them to start integrating these senses. And then I say, okay, tell me what you smell. And, you know, when you're in the woods, a lot, especially by a brook, you can kind of smell the water. Or if you're driving next to the, I assume it's the same way up here on Lakeshore Drive, you can smell the water. You know, it smells a little bit different there. Having them identify the things they can smell. Maybe they smell a fire burning at their cabin. You know, they smell the smoke from the chimney. I want them to use as many senses as they can and use them with complexity, not just one thing I see, one thing I smell. I want them really to get into it because that will help them create a vivid scene that they can immerse themselves in. Then when they start feeling stressed, or they're trying to get to sleep and they can't shut their mind off, they can go through the same action. All right, I'm thinking about 5 things that I see, and they can start seeing those things almost like pop up and populate their vision. And then they can imagine smelling those different smells. If somebody smells similar to your abuser, or a place smells similar to where they were abused, and this is very common, but we can't necessarily make smells go away. If your organization is in an old building, or if your client lives in an old building, you can't make it smell brand new. There's no new car smell left. But what you can do is encourage them, especially if there are smells like out and about, they can consider bringing what I call counter smells. Either a Ziploc baggie with a tissue in it that has some essential oils or perfume on it, something that gives them a positive smell. Because once those olfactory senses are, they're triggered by that troubling smell, well, let's trigger it by a different smell because we're triggering different memories. So that's one way of sort of thought stopping. I had a friend who used to carry around a little tiny vial of essential oil of lavender. And whenever she'd get stressed, she would just take the lid off and take a whiff. You don't necessarily need to put essential oils on your person. You can smell them, you can put them on cotton balls, whatever. But it doesn't have to be essential oils. It can be perfume. It can be rose petals. Whatever works for people. Grounding, visualizing their safe space, interrupting negative thoughts, all of those are awesome. One of my first jobs, I literally worked out of a closet. And so it wasn't real comfortable for clients or me. I was also like 6 months pregnant at the time, so I was taking up most of the closet. And to be quite that close, it was a little bit too close, but even being in a reasonably sized, 8 by 10 office or something, can feel claustrophobic for people, especially if there's no windows and they're afraid they can't get out. I used to have a therapist that I worked with. As soon as it came time for group to start, she would get up, she would lock the deadbolt on the door. Now you could easily unlock it and walk out of the door, but nobody could come in, and that was her point, was to prevent people from walking in and disturbing her group. But think about what the sound of that lock clicking triggered for some people who maybe had been beaten as children or something. Dad would lock the door, and then you knew things were going to go bad. So we do want to be sensitive to those sounds, but also just to the appearance. Yes, logically, I can get up, I can unlock the door and walk out now because I'm 24, I'm an adult, I can do this. But back then, I was 4. I couldn't reach the lock. I couldn't get out. And I feel like that 4-year-old again. So we do want to make sure that we help clients, remember their power now, but also we help our staff remember the things that we do that we don't even think might trigger someone. Create a feeling of safety in the therapeutic relationship by always encouraging them to talk. Help them silence the inner critic who is often also the abuser. Their abuser told them for the longest time that they were nothing, they were good for nothing, they were a horrible parent. Now they tell themselves that. They just picked up where the abuser left off. It's become a repeating tape. So we need to help them identify those thoughts and figure out how to silence them. Either backtalk them, or engage in thought stopping, or, there's lots of good DBT techniques. If y'all are familiar with DBT? Yes? Okay, accept and improves, the two acronyms for techniques to use for tolerating distress. But I think accept is, thought stopping is one of them. Teaching them multiple techniques. Have them write it down. When they are hearing that person in their head, they are not going to think, okay, what was that acronym again? Have them keep a list with themselves of 3 things that they can do to, 3 activities they can do, 3 comparisons they can make, 3, help me with the other C, I always forget it. Activities, comparisons, contributing, 3 things they can do to contribute, and so on. So they've got the entire list of things that work for them. What works for me for thought stopping may not work for Gladys, may not work for Stacy, but they work for me. So it's important that every person has their own list of distress tolerance skills. And then we can work in counseling, looking to use like cognitive processing therapy. What is that inner critic telling you? Now let's look at the facts for and against that belief. And encouraging them to not just look at the facts against the belief, but also for the belief. What facts do you have that prove that you are a bad mother or you are a worthless person? Because they probably have 1 or 2 things they can throw in there. But they have believed this for so long, if we ignore their belief and we invalidate them, we're not creating a sense of safety. We're not hearing them. They're saying, I'm a bad mom. Okay, tell me what makes you believe that. Let's look at the facts. And y'all know I write things down. I have a whiteboard in my office so we can see it. When you say something, the words are gone as soon as the sound disappears. When you write something, it lingers. They're going to go back. Their eyes are going to go back there. Their thoughts are going to go back there. So whiteboards can be really helpful, or chalkboards if you prefer. I don't like the dust. I always end up with a handprint. Help them gain control over extreme symptoms such as addiction, dissociation, self-harm, and suicidality. Those are big ones. Emotional dysregulation is one of the biggest. When people feel out of control with their emotions, they feel out of control of themselves. So helping them recognize, okay, this is my body's way of reacting. I'm reacting like a sports car instead of like a Honda. I really want to be more of a Honda. Nice, and Prius. Let's go Prius. Nice, energy efficient, not 0 to 120 in 2.4 seconds. Help them with grounding, emotional regulation skills development, psychoeducation about trauma. In the Seeking Safety book, there is a safe coping sheet, a list of safe coping skills, a safety plan contract, and a crisis intervention plan, all of which you can use with clients to help them, and I encourage them to do one for therapy, but also one for just generally. How can I feel safe? They may need to do they may have different coping skills for different places, and that's fine. use 5 techniques to help them in emotional regulation and grounding. 5 things you see, 4 things you hear, 3 things you smell, 2 things you feel, and 1 thing you taste, whatever. You can use whatever senses with whichever number. I just like the countdown, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Or you can have them look around the room and tell me about everything you see in here that's green. You know, that takes a minute. Thankfully today we had Panera, so there's some green that I can find. But teach them how to do a body scan. If they're really worked up, body scan may be too much for them to do. But after they've done something else to help them get regrounded a little bit, doing a body scan to notice their bodily reactions, what's still going on, is their heart still pounding, are their hands still sweaty. Recognizing that all of these are going to take the person's mind from thinking about the trauma, from having those trauma thoughts, to taking their mind over here, and making them focus on something. It's kind of like taking that monkey mind and making it sit still. But when we do that, it helps the HPA axis calm down, that threat response system. Do you have paternalism in your organization? Paternalism is doing for people things that they can do for themselves, or doing things for people that we think are in their best interest. Integration means paying attention to all issues at the same time, helping patients learn what the issues are and why they co-occur. Depression and substance abuse. Depression and domestic violence. Anxiety and domestic violence. You know, whatever your clients are presenting with emotionally, physically, interpersonally. We know that depression and anxiety are huge triggers and or highly correlated with exacerbation of autoimmune diseases. So, you know, it's not uncommon to see somebody with depression and fibromyalgia and opioid use disorder show up at a substance abuse clinic. And we want to help them see how all of those things might be interconnected, because that helps them make sense of what's going on. Understand the course of the presenting issues in recovery. For example, with abstinence, you know, if you've got a client who is in substance abuse treatment, the PTSD may feel worse before it feels better. Because all of a sudden they're feeling something. And, oh crap, they can't escape. In domestic violence, for example, you know, they got out of that relationship. They're finally physically safe. But now they're alone with their thoughts, and they're fearing their abandonment and all this other stuff all these other needs that relationship was meeting, those needs aren't being met anymore. That relationship was providing housing for them and maybe their kids. That relationship was providing some kind of validation. They may have loved that person. They may believe that if they were only better, that they would be more lovable, and that they see themselves causing the assaults. You know, you see where we go from there. But we need to help people understand that, okay, you take the first step, you feel liberated, but it may start to hurt like hell again before it gets better. Prepare them for that. So they have a plan for if it starts to hurt again, or if it starts to hurt, what they're going to do. The interpersonal domain is an area of special need because most traumatic injury arises from trauma inflicted by others that may evoke in the survivor distrust, confusion over what can be expected in relationships, or concern over reenactments of abusive power. Interpersonal topics help patients maximize the presence of supportive people and let go of destructive people in their own time. And that's what's important. If we force them to do it, just like if I tell my teenage daughter she can't see the boy that she wants to see anymore, she won't do it. And she's going to do it with all that much more fervor because I told her not to. No, I hope she didn't do that, but she's a good girl. Patients communicate honestly when it is safe to do so. And there's that caveat in there. To recognize that they can only change themselves at this point. That's a hard one for a lot of people, especially kids. Kids are like, why won't mom love me? Why does dad keep choosing cocaine over me? Well, we can't change mom or dad right now. I can educate you maybe about what might be going on with mom or dad so you don't take this personally, but the only person you have control over is you. And that's a bitter pill to swallow for any of us. It's my cousin got hooked on cocaine and then pretty much every other drug out there for a while, and was working the streets and homeless, and my aunt it killed her because she wanted to change her. She wanted to fix her, and she would go out and show up at Jessica's pimp's house and demand her back and find her on the streets and tell her to get in the car, and Jess was having none of it. It's just like, go jump in a lake, probably not using those words. Because the only person my aunt could control at that point was herself and her reaction. There was nothing she was going to do at that point because Jess wasn't ready. And it's important for people to notice extreme relationship dynamics that re-evoke the trauma, like overcompliance, enmeshment, and engaging in unhelpful behaviors. A lot of times people recreate their family of origin or their family of distress at their work environment, at their workplace. We spend so much time there. So it's important for them to look at the dynamics in that little microcosm. Case management is begun at the first session and addressed at every session throughout treatment, and it's assumed that psychological interventions can only work if patients have adequate treatment base. Think about Maslow. You need those biological and safety needs met before you can even begin to work on love and belonging, self-esteem, and actualization. Therapist processes that are emphasized include building an alliance, having compassion for patients' experience, using various coping skills in one's own life. Not just saying, okay, here's a coping skill. Ain't it grand? But each day when they come in, tell me about something. I always start out with, tell me about something that went well that last week. Okay, great. Now, tell me about a challenge you faced and a coping skill you used. Or tell me about a challenge you faced that didn't go so well. You lost your temper, did something, and let's brainstorm what coping skill might have worked better, and let's role play. Let's role play that out. How might that have gone differently had you have used belly breathing, had you have used thought stopping? And encourage them to retroactively replay it, in session, so at least they're practicing it there. We need to model what it means to try hard by meeting the patient sometimes more than halfway. Sometimes we feel like we meet them halfway and they step on our feet, and we're just like, okay, fine. You don't want help? I'm here when you're ready. But
I have a problem with that when I see my staff do that. When I see that occur, when they just drop, like, what is that?
there's a lot of reasons. I'm thinking burnout is one of them. We've had enough people come through and we have tried to heroically help them, and it's gone bad that sometimes people get burned out and they're just like, okay, I'm here. I'm doing what I've got to do, but I'm not going to go above and beyond. The flip side of positive therapist processes is negative countertransference, including harsh confrontation, inability to hold patients accountable due to misguided sympathy, being victim to a patient's abusiveness, power struggles, and allowing patients to be scapegoated, either by other staff or by other clients. We need to pay attention to the safety of the environment. If we are confronting people harshly, if we are getting angry with them, we need to check ourselves. Why are we feeling threatened? A lot, for me, when I engage with clients and I start to feel angry, I'm frustrated because I see so much potential. I see such a better life, and they're on such a good path or whatever, and I see them giving up. And it's hard for me not to want to push them, to nudge them, to holler, scream, coach at them, but that's not my place. My place is to be supportive. So recognizing where your own frustration comes from and checking that at the door is going to be important. Not being overly sympathetic. Oh, that person couldn't help it because they had such a bad life. No, just because Danny Rawling had a bad life does not excuse the fact that he's a serial killer. We cannot be. So, in a decisional balance exercise, you have these, and you want to increase the green and decrease the black. I did have red and green, but it looked too Christmassy, like stop and go, but I just couldn't do it, especially not with orange. Hurt. So the benefits of staying the same. Too often we don't ask clients, what's the benefit of staying the same? Well, we're telling them that they need to get clean and sober. We don't ask them, well, what was the benefit of use? What did you get out of it? They got something out of it or they wouldn't have done it. And you see this, our happy little acronym again. What are the drawbacks to staying the same? Well, they can probably list those, because everybody's been telling them those. Again, what are the benefits to change? That's what everybody tells them. They know the party line on those. I'm going to be healthier, I'm going to be happier, my kids will, yeah. Party line. But we also need to talk about what scares you. What scares you about change? In substance abuse, they say, I can't imagine going my entire life without having another drink. And we say, okay, don't imagine your whole life without another drink. Imagine the next day without another drink. The next 24 hours. Let's take it in little chunks. Let's not get too far ahead of ourselves. And see where we go from there. And sometimes it's an hour by hour sort of thing. But anyway, so job, the benefits, financial benefits. You're financially independent. You're financially stable, we hope. If you're making minimum wage, that might be a little dicey. But you at least have a little bit more liquidity. You may have the ability to afford housing. You might be able to get your kids into childcare. So it's a break from having your kids 24/7. You go from a stay-at-home mom to working a job. Daycare's expensive. I don't know if you have subsidized daycare here or not. There's lots of issues there, but there's a possibility. Freedom with finances and recreation, which also coincides with drawbacks to change, bills before thrills. Love that. But that's a new phrase I learned today. When they get money, they have to remember that they've got to pay their bills. And some people have never paid bills. So the concept of, okay, I have this bill due on the 1st and this bill due on the 14th, and it's overwhelming. Sitting them down if you've got any financial counselors. But a lot of the stuff is pretty simple, and we can sit down and do it with them and show them, this is how you draw up a budget. I'm not going to tell you what to spend your money on, but I'm going to show you how you figure out, okay, I know that my electric bill is usually $150 a month. So I know that $150 of my first paycheck every month has to go to that. And just kind of generally helping them figure things out. You get a new support system. You're going theoretically to work with other people. You're going to meet, hopefully, a couple of people that you like. Your spirits are often lifted when you're engaging with others and not, bouncing around the house by yourself all day long, unless you really love the people in your neighborhood. But we'll go with a new positive support system. Self-esteem is increased because look at what you're doing now. Look how independent and you've become. You're building skills, you're growing as a person, and you have the ability for promotions. That's all well and good. But, as we will see when we get down here, And we talked about a little bit earlier, what does a rich and meaningful life look like to that person? Maybe that person always envisioned being a stay-at-home mom or dad, and now they're having to get a job because they are a single parent. So a job, you know, some of this stuff is just not, you know, rewarding to them. I mean, it sounds great to some of us, may not sound rewarding to them. So we need to ask them what the benefits, you know, what benefits a job can give them. Drawbacks to change for some people. A lot of people will lose some benefits, whether it's disability or SNAP or whatever. Unfortunately, it doesn't seem to balance out, where if you make $500 a week, that your benefits only get cut by $500 a week or something. It is disproportionate. So we do need to advocate for them there. Less free time. Now you got to get up 40 hours a week and travel on top of that. So you're losing 50, 60 hours a week going to a job. So you're not able to hang out and watch Oprah or whatever you did. There can be a strain on other relationships if other people used to count on you to run their errands and pick up their kids or make meals for them. It's plumb exhausting. You know, when you go, if you've ever switched, either gone from not being employed for a while, like you were on maternity leave. I know for me, going from maternity leave to going back to being working full time, like overnight. It was just like that first week, I had to get my land legs. It was exhausting. By the end of the first 8-hour day, I was like, oh my gosh, how did I ever do this? I'm too old to be doing this. My husband was like, you were doing it 3 months ago. You ain't that much older. Okay. Sleep adjustments. If you're one of those people who likes to stay up till 3 in the morning and sleep until 10, a lot of jobs are not going to accommodate that. Additional responsibilities with kids. Now you've got to get them up, get them dressed, get them to daycare in the morning, or get them, you know, you've got a plan. And there are also different problems. When you have a job, now you only have so many sick days or vacation days. If your car goes out, you've got to figure out how to get to work. There are other stressors that can come up. And I encourage people to think about as many barriers to or obstacles to them maintaining their job and plan for them ahead of time. If your kid gets sick, who are 3 people that could pick them up from school or help you out? If your car breaks down, who are 3 people that you could call, or 2 people in an Uber that you could call to get your happy butt to work? You know, let's make a plan ahead of time so when it comes down to crunch, you're not freaking out at the last minute going, I don't know what I'm going to do. And we want to encourage them to try to mitigate as many of these drawbacks as possible, like less free time. Okay, yeah, you're right, you have a lot less free time now. So let's make the free time you have count. Who can help you out with some of the things? You know, sometimes this is not plausible, but like as children get older, my children got to the point where they could start putting away their own clothes. That was a great day. And then they got to the point where they were washing their own clothes. Oh, I was in heaven. But so I wasn't doing that. There was a period that my daughter decided she liked to cook, and I didn't need the additional, I didn't have to have the additional help at that point. I wasn't going to turn it down. But she started cooking for the family every night. So she was making dinner. She was a good cook. And I was like, cool. I can just come home from work and plop my butt down at the table. I'm liking this. So looking to see what can you do to compromise. Yeah, maybe you may have to get, if you can afford it, more frozen dinners. Not the ideal thing, but every once in a while, cut yourself some slack and say, okay, we're going to get, you know, the $5 Little Caesars pizza on Friday night so we can all just relax in the evening. Children need to attend school with at least 85% attendance rate. Benefits, parents get their time to take care of things. They can go to work. There's free child care. They can bond with younger children. Their children are better prepared for work because they're going to school, and they have access to other resources. So school opens up a lot of resources. Drawbacks to change. You got to wake up early. You got to depend on others to get them to school, or you've got to get them to school. I hated that school line. That line of cars that you sit in for 3 hours. No, it's not 3 hours. It felt like 3 hours. The extra stress, having to pack that lunch every single day. Lots of requirements, dental, health records, those sorts of things. And different start times at different schools for different kids. So you may have an elementary school, a middle schooler, and a, whatever. So those can all be things that are challenges to figure out. Yes, you may have to wake up earlier. Figuring out how they're going to get to school, making a plan, carpool, whatever, ahead of time, so you're not waiting on Sunday night going, all right, how in the heck am I going to get you to school before I got to be to work at 8 o'clock? Planning ahead, and thinking about what they need, like for the lunches. Having them think about what kind of lunches they want. Having them pack their own lunch, maybe, if they're old enough. I mean, my kids enjoy packing their own lunch. But there are some ways we can mitigate that, but encouraging them to look at the benefits. There are also drawbacks, like Johnny might not want to go to school. So we need to look at why Johnny doesn't want to go to school. Is he getting bullied? Is he struggling in school for some reason? Is he bored? There are a lot of different things that may be going on, so we do need to evaluate if part of the attendance problem isn't the parent, but it's something going on with between Johnny and the school, or Sally and the school. We need to evaluate that. And we may have to go through the same thing with Johnny or Sally, the little kid. What are the benefits to going to school? You get to see your friends. And if you go to school every day this week, then there's this reward at the end of the week. Use some rewards and star charts and things. This goal is to develop hope. Benefits is it increases engagement, lessens violence, increases utilization of the tools, and increases motivation for daily activities. If people have hope that what they're doing is going to work, then they're probably going to keep trying to do it. If I believe that if I keep studying, I'm actually going to pass this test, if I have hope that I can pass this test, I'm going to keep studying. If it's calculus, and I'm looking at the book going, I have no clue why they threw that Greek letter in there. I have no hope. Do you think I'm going to be really motivated to study for that test? Not a bit. Now I'm motivated to walk down to the registrar's office and drop it. Anyhow, so I wasn't engaged. And, going into calculus, I'll use that one as an example. I didn't even have hope going into calculus that I could pass it. I'm like, I have to pass it in order to, take this next step. But I know good and well, I struggled with pre-algebra. I barely got to this point. So I went in kind of hopeless and defeated and created a self-fulfilling prophecy. We need to look at that with our clients. When people don't have hope, they feel powerless, they feel helpless, they feel trapped, which can increase violence. So, hope lessens violence. Drawbacks to change. When you're hopeful, when you are there, you're putting yourself out there, you're standing on the pinnacle of that mountain going, I think I can do this. There is always the chance you are going to start sliding back down. Like the little engine that could, I think I can, I think I can, I think I can. If he had stopped, we're going to assume his brakes didn't work, gravity would push him right back down again. So when we have hope, there is always the risk that we're going to be disappointed. Hope can decrease acceptance from their social group. There's fear of the unknown, feelings of isolation, and lack of resources or relationships. Some of these we can mitigate. What is it that you hope? Maybe you have somebody who hopes to be a lawyer. Okay? You're 19, you just had a child, you're homeless, but you've got hope. So let me see if I can help you connect with the resources that you need to achieve that goal. you know, we need to help them be realistic, but we also want to help them be hopeful at the same time, seeing that if they do this next right thing, then they can get a scholarship. If they take the next step, then they can do this. Let's help them see a path that where it is possible, even if it's going to be a lot of hard work. I learned something, I'm proud to say, I have to work at it sometimes, but I'm proud to say I've learned something from every single client that I've ever engaged with. And I try to learn something from people. I try to learn from you guys. Because people have things to offer. And people have strengths that are different than yours. And if you're open to it, and if you really look, sometimes you've got to look, because it may be a classroom where people are generally sitting and being quiet, but if you listen for that little kernel, you know, I've got a lot to take home today. And we can take a lot home from our clients, and we want to let them know that, wow, thank you. I had never thought about it that way. I had a client one time tell me that recovery, this was the one who'd been through treatment like 14 times, and I'm not exaggerating on the number, unfortunately. He's had sustained sobriety for almost 20 years now. But he told me one time that in recovery, it's hard to stay sober. He'd never made it past a year and a half. It's hard to stay sober because in early recovery, life is just gray. There's no colors. There's no ups, there's no downs, it's just blah. And I was like, wow, okay, I can understand that. You know, that gives me a metaphor that I can really kind of sink my understanding into. And that also made me much more passionate for addressing co-occurring issues. But I told him that. I told him as much. Thank you for telling me that, because that gives me a new perspective. And I told him at some point recently that I share that story with just about every class that I teach. He's like, oh, I had no idea. I'm like, yeah, you made a big difference. Crave for motivation. Have people check in daily, having compassion for themselves. Some days you're going to wake up and you ain't going to be motivated to go to the gym, to go to work, to have hope, to do your treatment, whatever it is. Have compassion for yourself. Have empathy and go, I know it is really hard today. That doesn't mean you get a bye. That doesn't mean you go, okay, I'm not feeling it, so I don't have to. But it means you're having compassion. They need to report to themselves how the week went and acknowledge difficulties, but also validate the things that they did well. And this is something that a lot of our clients forget. They can focus on the things they did wrong or that went wrong. And they need to explain how they use their strengths and personal power to create successes, even if that just means trying again tomorrow. That's a strength. That determination to pick yourself back up and try it again tomorrow. You can have them write this out in a daily journal. You can have them just think about it, whatever works for them. But it's important for them to, or in a weekly journal, it's important for them to check in and remember the things that they did do well and really focus on how they're using their strengths and power to increase their sense of empowerment. Critical elements of motivation. They need to be willing, ready, and able. I can be willing to do a lot of things. Maybe. Not skydiving. But I can be willing. I can have the ability to do it. So I can be willing to be a counselor. I can have the ability. I went to school. I got my master's degree. I can be a counselor. But do I have the ability? Can I actually take that book learning and translate it into something useful in the clinical room? Same thing with coping skills. Clients can want to change the way they react to things. They can be willing to change. They want to learn. They can have the ability, you know, they know the skills, they know how to cope, but they also need to be able to translate that into practice. Shortcut question. Are my current thoughts, feelings, and actions moving me closer to or further away from what's important to me? You know, you're sitting in traffic and you're getting all fired up and your blood pressure is just climbing and climbing and climbing and climbing. And you can ask yourself, is all the energy I'm spending being stressed out over this traffic, which I cannot control, doing anything to help me get closer to my goals? Unless a stroke is there on your goals, then probably not. So figuring out what can you do. For me, I turn on the comedy station on Sirius XM. I'm like, well, if I'm going to sit here, I might as well laugh. You know, you can do that. Or if I'm the passenger, I start checking email, or I get on LinkedIn and do some of the stuff that I can do from my phone. I try to make use of the time. I'm like, well, can't make traffic go any faster. So, music can be really good. Every event is an opportunity to choose thoughts and behaviors that will help you use your energy to move towards your goals and values. Acceptance. That noticing and choosing and acceptance is accepting without judgment, not getting frustrated with yourself because you feel a certain way. You feel that way. Okay. How you feel? What you gonna do about it? How are you going to improve the next moment? Commitment and purposeful action, mean that people choose to use their energy on thoughts and behaviors that move them closer to their goals. You know, they know they've only got so much energy in their tank. If you want to go back to that analogy of the directions to your vacation destination. You're driving along, and you can think of something that happens, something that's distressful. You can think of that like a road sign off the road saying, come visit. And you can use your energy to drive 15 miles that way to see whatever it is that they were trying to get you to go see, which might be fine. But is that getting you closer to your goals? Is that getting you closer to your destination? No. No, it's a detour. Is a detour worth the effort? Is it worth spending your gas on? Or do you want to spend your gas to get towards your goal? You know, helping people visualize that. Helping people figure out what they would do if they were stuck in a traffic jam. You know, you're driving along, headed towards your destination, and oh, there's a wreck. Traffic is stopped both ways. You're stuck. What are you going to do? You're going to sit there and rev your engine? Get all fired up about it? Rev, rev, rev. People need to go. Honk the horn. Rev, rev, rev. Is that a good use of your energy? Good use of your gas? No, probably not. It's going to make your engine block crack too. So, what can you choose to do? You know, you're not necessarily going to keep moving forward towards that goal right now. You may be at a stopping point. You may be at a stuck point, and that's okay. It doesn't mean you have to necessarily react impulsively. Sometimes clients have difficulty getting to that behavioral bottom line or actually taking action. And the behavioral bottom line is, what is it that I really need to do to move towards my goals? And actually do it. You know, I can talk all day about how I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired, and I want to be healthy, or I'm tired of being in this abusive relationship and I want to be in a happy, healthy relationship. I can talk about that until the cows come home. But the behavioral bottom line is where the Nike rubber meets the road. You've got to be willing to actually take action. Supportive interventions are like plugging a hole in a ship until you can get to port. Well, maybe not a ship. Let's talk about a little canoe or something. Plugging a hole in a ship probably wouldn't be good. Solution-focused interventions aim to help the person move from surviving the moment to thriving. So, preparing the ship and figuring out how not to hit the reef the next time. That would be good. In supportive interventions, we establish rapport, we validate, and we can help the person return to their wise mind, to use DBT terminology. Get out of that emotional mind where they're just being impulsive, they want to make the pain stop. Help them get into their wise mind where they can make good choices. When problem solving, use authenticity to communicate how much you want to help. Look for exceptions. Identify ways the person or someone else has solved the problem in the past. Set small achievable goals and follow up regularly. A lot of people who've experienced trauma have felt disempowered, have felt, and especially complex trauma and chronic trauma, wears people down. They're exhausted. So it's important that we help them develop some tools that can help them feel empowered, that can help them develop that hope and feel like, okay, this is starting to make a little bit of sense. Another thing that you can do is have people write things down, what's going on, which is this chapter right now. How they feel, what's stressing them out, what is, and then we can start to look for clues. If you have them write their autobiography, it's fun if they enjoy writing. If they don't enjoy writing, they generally hate every minute of it, so I don't force them to do it. But they can write it like a television series. The first season is their infancy. The second season is the elementary years, third season middle school, you see where we're going. And then we can look at how prior seasons and the character development of the prior seasons are impacting the protagonist, them, in the current season. And so we're not talking about them so much as we're talking about this person in the story, which helps them unhook from it. And a lot of times it helps them look more objectively at what's going on, so it doesn't feel quite as threatening. And we can draw parallels. I'm wondering if that incident back there is contributing to why this person's acting this way now. The character talking about in the story. So it can be fun. And then you can also have them write how they see the future, the next chapter. Now that you have all this knowledge, or you're working towards this rich and meaningful life, what does the next chapter look like? Who is there, what do they do, and how do they feel? It gives them something to work on over a period of time, but it can also help them develop more of a timeline and start to draw more connections.
Can I make a comment? On narrative therapy, I kind of adapt a little bit of that with children, with puppets and dollhouses.
Cool.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Puppets are great, and dollhouses, if you have access to that sort of thing, because that's another way for children who aren't going to write 40 pages of prose to communicate what's going on, because a puppet saying it is different than them saying it sometimes. Continue to think about one client each week who's at risk for dropout and brainstorm reasons why they might not want to be in counseling, why they might not feel safe, or why they might not be motivated to continue treatment. And identify at least 3 ways to address these issues and increase their engagement. And that, as they say, is that. So, John Panette, if you've never listened to him, he's really funny. But he talks about going to the gym, and you guys can pack up, I'm just going to ramble.